What would you do if everything you had been given, a trade, a roof, a reason to stay in one place, was taken from you in a single autumn, and all you were left with was $8 and a dead man's tool tucked into the pocket of your coat? That is not a question we ask lightly. For Elspeth Caird, it was not a question at all. It was a Tuesday morning in November of 1887 in the Lake Country of Northern Ontario, and she was 22 years old and watching strangers divide a life she had helped build. Settle in with us for a moment. We want to tell you how that morning ended and what she found beneath a mill that had been sealed shut for 7 years. But first, you need to know who Elspeth was, because that matters more than any building, any deed, or any locked door. Her parents had died of typhoid in the summer of 1873, when she was 8 years old and the world was still very large. She was taken in by a man named Hugh Dunbar, a bookbinder and document keeper who operated a small shop at the edge of Coldwater Crossing and who had no family of his own. He was not a warm man in the way that word usually means. He did not tell stories or ruffle her hair, but he taught her everything he knew, which was considerable. He showed her how to press a folded crease into parchment so it would hold for a century. He showed her how to read the difference between a forgery and an original by the weight of the ink and the texture of the paper beneath it. He showed her how a document, properly kept, was a kind of promise that outlived the people who made it. He died in the spring of 1887, quietly in his sleep, the way people who have lived carefully sometimes do. Within the week, a man named Grant Vetch arrived at the shop door with a folded letter and a look of patient regret. Grant Vetch was the county land registry agent, a position that, in Coldwater Crossing, carried a great deal of weight. He was tall, with careful manners and small eyes that never quite matched his smile. The letter claimed that Hugh Dunbar had owed him a substantial debt and that the shop, its contents, and the lease were to be transferred in settlement. There was a signature on the document. There was an official seal. Elspeth had been trained to read documents. She read this one carefully. It was real enough, as far as she could tell. She could not prove it wasn't. She left with what she was wearing, the tools in her apron, and Hugh Dunbar's bone folder, which she tucked into her coat pocket before Vetch's men could catalog it. It was a small thing, a flat piece of old ivory, stained brown at the edges from 40 years of use. But it was the tool Hugh had always kept closest, and she would not leave it behind. The months that followed were the kind that hollow a person out. She worked in the laundry at the Lakeview Inn until the owner decided she took too long. She worked in the kitchen of a boarding house on Railway Street until the cook found a younger girl willing to work for less. By October, the town constable had told her she had 3 days to find proper lodging or move on down the concession road to the next settlement. She had $8 left in the world and no one who owed her anything. On the third day, not knowing what else to do, she walked to the town square, where the county land auction was being held. She was not there to bid. She was there because the crowd was warm and the wind off the lake was not. And standing at the edge of a crowd is one of the few things a person can do without money. The auctioneer was a red-faced man who worked through his list with practiced speed. A hay lot, a seized mule and cart, a foreclosed homestead out on the third concession. Then he paused, adjusted his hat, and said in the tone of a man already anticipating laughter, Lot 14, the Whitmore Granary. 5 acres, the main mill building, in need of significant restoration. I'll be honest with you folks. 1 stone office structure, 2 collapsed outbuildings, and a cellar of unknown condition. Starting bid, $15. The laughter came right on schedule. The Whitmore Granary was a local joke in the way that certain places become jokes when enough people have failed at them. 3 different families had bought it over the years. 3 had given it up inside a season, citing rotten floors, strange smells rising from underground, and a structure that seemed to resist every repair. The stories attached to it had grown elaborate in the way stories do when nobody has been inside a place for a long time. Nobody bid. $10, the auctioneer tried. Come on now, 5 good acres and a working well. Silence. $8. Who'll give me $8 for 5 acres and a roof over their head? Elspeth's hand went up before she had finished thinking about it. The way her hand had moved at Hugh Dunbar's workbench a decade ago, when he held up a bone folder and asked if anyone knew what it was for. Every face in the square turned to find her at the back of the crowd, a thin young woman in a worn wool coat, her hand in the air, her expression giving nothing away. $8 from the young woman, the auctioneer said, surprise making his voice louder than usual. Do I hear 9? $9 for 5 acres and a mill? He looked around. Nobody moved. Sold. $8. She paid it at the clerk's table. The deed was warm from sitting in the sun. It felt impossibly thin for something that was supposed to mean something. We want to stop here for just a moment. We want you to sit with what she had just done. Spent her last $8 on a building that an entire town had given up on, with nothing but a bookbinder's tool in her pocket and the memory of a man who had taught her to trust what was written down. What do you think she found when she finally made it out there? What do you think had been sealed in that cellar for 7 years? Leave us your thoughts in the comments and stay with us, because the answer was not what anyone expected, not even Elspeth. Grant Vetch was standing at the edge of the crowd when she walked away with the deed. She noticed him because he was the only person in the square not laughing. He was watching her with a stillness she didn't have a name for yet. She filed it away, the way Hugh had taught her to file things that didn't make sense yet, carefully, somewhere you could find it again. She stopped at the merchant's on Railway Street to ask about credit for a few basic supplies. The merchant glanced past her shoulder before answering. He was sorry, he said. He couldn't extend credit without a fixed address. She mentioned the deed. He looked at it, looked away, and said very quietly that Mr. Vetch had certain views about people who took on the Whitmore granary without the town's backing, and that he couldn't risk the business relationship. She thanked him and left. Grant Vetch had certain views. She filed that away too. The Whitmore granary was 2 miles out the old mill road, through stands of maple and birch already stripped bare by November, the ground iron-hard beneath her feet. She smelled the lake before she saw the mill, cold water and dead leaves, and something faintly mineral, like stone that had been wet for a long time. When she saw it, her heart did something uncomfortable. The 2 outbuildings were flat, nothing but gray timber lying in the frozen grass. The main mill building had its north face intact, but its roof half-collapsed inward, open to the sky in a way that made the whole structure look exhausted. But the stone office building, small, square, 4 thick walls with a door swollen in its frame, was standing. She forced the door with her shoulder, 3 hard attempts before it gave with a groan of damp wood. Inside, a single room, a stone fireplace, a floor of packed earth, a window without glass, cold but dry. The walls were thick limestone, set by someone who had understood what a northern Ontario winter could do to a building if you gave it half a chance. She gathered fallen timber, built a fire, ate the last of the bread she'd bought 2 days before, and lay down on the floor with her coat over her and listened to the dark. There were sounds, not ghostly sounds. She did not believe in ghosts. Hugh had seen to that, but the sounds of a building constructed over something hollow, a low settling, like deep breath, a structure that had empty space in it that shouldn't be there. She slept eventually. In the morning, she got up and went to work. On the 4th day, a man appeared at the end of the mill road with a bundle of shingles over one shoulder and a pail of nails in his hand. He was past 60, with a carpenter's hands and a face worn smooth by weather. He said his name was Solomon Caird, that he'd been a carpenter most of his working life, and had been watching from his kitchen window a 1/4 mile down the road and thought she could use the shingles. He did not offer pity. He did not make speeches. He set the shingles down, asked where she wanted them, and got to work. Solomon Caird came back the next day with timber and a hand saw, and the day after that with a second saw. They worked in silence that became comfortable by degrees. He told her, in the economical way of a man who doesn't waste words, that he had known old William Whitmore, the man who built the mill back in the 1860s. He built good, Solomon said, fitting a board with the ease of 10,000 repetitions. But he always said there was more to this place than he'd told anyone. Whatever he meant by that, he died before he explained it. The sealed door, when Elspeth found it, explained it for him. She found the stairs first. A set of stone steps descending from below the collapsed section of the main mill, half hidden under fallen timber that she'd spent 3 days clearing. The steps were worn smooth in the center, which meant they had been used often at some point, which meant something below was worth using. She took a lantern down. At the bottom, the door. It was oak, thick as her forearm, bound with iron straps that ran its full width and height. The wood had not rotted. The iron had not rusted through. Whoever had built this door had built it to outlast the mill above it, and they had succeeded. The bolts in the frame had been driven through, and their ends hammered flat on the other side. Not locked, but sealed. In the center of the door, where a lock plate would normally sit, was a circle of hardened wax impressed with a stamp. She brought the lantern close. A crown, a scale, a key. She knew that mark. Hugh Dunbar had shown it to her once on a government letter, years ago. Dominion Land Registry, federal jurisdiction, not county. She had seen county marks in every shape and size over 14 years of working with documents. But this was not a county mark. This was something that should not have been sealed in the cellar of an abandoned mill in northern Ontario. And the fact that it was here meant someone had put it here on purpose. Behind her, 20 feet up the stairs, Solomon's borrowed horse refused to come any farther. She could hear him stop, plant his feet, blow a long unhappy breath through his nose. His instincts were telling him something her rational mind was still working out. She went up and got Solomon. He studied the seal for a long time without speaking. "That's a Dominion registry stamp," he said finally. "Federal, not county." He looked at the hammered bolt ends. Someone sealed this from the outside so thoroughly that nobody could get back in without making a great deal of noise about it. He looked at her. Whatever's in there, it wasn't put away by accident. It took them most of a day to break through. They used a pine log for a ram, Solomon on one end and Elspeth on the other, swinging in steady rhythm. The oak held. The iron groaned. Splinters came away in handfuls. On the fourth full swing, the first bolt gave, not broke, but bent enough to pull free from the stone, and after that, one by one, the others followed. The door fell inward, with a sound like a book dropped hard onto a stone floor. A gust of cold, dry air came out. Not the smell of rot or stagnant water, but cedar oil and old paper, the particular smell of things kept on purpose by someone who knew how to keep them. Elspeth went in first, lantern at arm's length. Shelves. Floor to ceiling, along every wall, lined with oilskin-wrapped bundles, each one tied with twine, each one carefully stacked. There were hundreds of them. She reached out and lifted the nearest bundle down, set it on the floor, untied the twine with hands she told herself were cold rather than shaking. Inside, a sheaf of documents on heavy government paper, the crown watermark visible when she held them to the light. She read the header. Dominion of Canada, Department of the Interior, Land Patent. She read the name of the grantee, then read it again. It was a family she knew by name, the way you know everyone in a small enough town. She opened another bundle. Another family, another land patent. She went through 12 bundles in 12 minutes. And everyone was a different household, in Coldwater Crossing or the surrounding townships. And everyone was a Dominion land patent that had never, she understood with a cold certainty now, been filed with the land office in Toronto. These families had paid Grant Vetch to register their land. These documents had never left this cellar. For years, perhaps longer, every family on these pages had believed their property was legally recorded. It was not. Every one of them was living on land they could not legally prove was theirs. At the back of the cellar on a small desk, a ledger. Elspeth sat down, opened the cover, and read the first line. She knew that handwriting. She knew it the way she knew her own hands. She had watched it for 14 years, had learned to write her own name from the example of it. The handwriting of a man who had been precise in all things, who had never made a careless mark in his life. Hugh Dunbar. The ledger was a complete accounting. Every document in the cellar catalogued in his hand, every family name and parcel and date of original deposit. Each page was signed off with a neat stamp. C. Vetch, Registry Agent, District of Coldwater Crossing. Hugh had documented everything. He had sat in this cellar with a lantern, just as she was sitting now, and he had written down what he saw. On the inside cover, 2 notes, one longer than the other. The first read, "These land patents were delivered to Grant Vetch for filing with the Dominion Land Office in Toronto. They were never filed. The families who paid for this service do not know their land is unregistered. They have been paying annual renewal fees to a man who has no intention of registering anything. I have documented all of it. If I am gone when you find this, do not go to the county. Go to a federal land officer. The registry mark on the door is federal jurisdiction. Vetch cannot touch it." The second note was smaller, folded into the crease of the cover, written more quickly, the letters crowding together as though he had not had time to be careful. "Elspeth, if this ever reaches you, look at the bone folder, the mark on the handle. You will know what to do when you see it." She pulled the bone folder from her coat pocket and turned it over. The mark on the handle that she had always taken for a maker's stamp, worn nearly smooth, pressed deep into the old ivory, was a crown, a scale, a key, the same mark as the seal on the door. Hugh Dunbar had known about this cellar. He had made sure she would find it, in the only way he could, by giving her a tool that carried the sign. Not a key that opened anything, a key that told her she was in the right place, that she was the right person. She sat in that cold underground room for a long time before she went upstairs to tell Solomon what she had found. Word travels the way it always does in a small place, faster than horses and twice as persistent. A trapper's boy who passed by the mill 2 days later saw light in the cellar opening and told his father, who told his neighbors, who were at that very moment discussing their spring renewal payment to Grant Vetch, and whether the figure seemed higher than the previous year. By evening, Grant Vetch himself rode out with 2 men, their horses kicking up frozen mud on the mill road. He was all-practiced authority when he dismounted. The kind of authority that lives in posture and timing, in the assumption that the person across from you will step back. He said she had taken possession of a county archive annex without authorization, that the contents were government property under his jurisdiction, and that she was to step aside immediately. She stood at the top of the cellar stairs, with the ledger held in both hands. Her voice, when she found it, was steadier than she had expected. "This is federal property, Mr. Vetch," she said. "The seal on the door is a Dominion registry mark, not a county mark, and your stamp appears on the receipt page of every document in that cellar." She paused. "Hugh Dunbar's handwriting is on the catalog. He documented all of it 6 years ago." Grant Vetch went the particular color of a man who has been certain for a very long time and has just become uncertain. His 2 men looked at each other. Vetch found his voice again, ragged at the edges now. There would be legal consequences, he said. She didn't understand what she was dealing with. He would have this matter settled before the week was out. Then the sky came down. The blizzard had been building off Lake Superior for 2 days, the kind that rolls in from the open water, with a speed that even longtime residents find disorienting. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an hour. The wind came sideways, off the lake, hard enough to lean into. Visibility from the mill gate to the road went white. Grant Vetch and his men had a choice between pressing forward in a killing storm or getting back to town while the road was still findable. He turned his horse. "This is not over," he said into the wind. The storm lasted 3 days. On the second day, James and Netta Branagh arrived at the mill gate on foot with their 4 children. Their farmhouse roof collapsed under the weight of ice. Elspeth brought them inside, built the fire higher, gave them the blankets she had gathered over the weeks. On the 3rd morning, 2 Sorrell brothers appeared, loggers whose bush camp had given way to the wind. The stone office building, built by a man who had understood northern winters, held them all and stayed warm. That night, by lantern light, Elspeth showed James Branagh a document from the cellar. His name on a Dominion land patent for the 120 acres he had farmed for 9 years. He read it 3 times. He had been paying Grant Vetch a renewal fee every spring without fail, assuming it was simply how land registration worked. He put the document down on the table and looked at the ceiling for a while without speaking. Beside him, Netta Branagh pressed her hand flat against the paper as though to make sure it was real. When the storm broke, the sky was the hard, bright blue that comes only after a serious Ontario blizzard, the kind that makes everything look both more beautiful and more serious than before. On the morning of the 4th day, a man on horseback appeared on the mill road from the east, from the direction of Heron Bay and the railway station, where he had been stranded for 3 days. He had seen the smoke from the mill chimney and the lights in a building he knew from his field maps as abandoned. And a federal surveyor on a Dominion mandate does not pass an occupied abandoned structure without stopping to understand why. His name was James Bolton. He was a Dominion land surveyor, field officer for the Department of the Interior, and Solomon Caird went out to meet him and brought him inside without fanfare. Elspeth put the ledger on the table in front of him and set the oilskin bundles beside it and stepped back. James Bolton was a methodical man. He read the ledger from first page to last. He examined documents at random from the cellar, checked watermarks and registration seals, compared the dates on Hugh Dunbar's catalog to the dates on the patents themselves. He looked at the wax seal on the open door. He looked at the hammered bolt ends. He was quiet for a long time, and the room was quiet with him, the Branagh children asleep in the corner, the fire low and steady. Then he wrote out 2 documents at Elspeth's small desk. The first placed all contents of the cellar under protection of the Dominion of Canada, pursuant to the Department of the Interior Act, effective immediately. The second appointed Elspeth Caird as temporary custodian of the Whitmore granary and its records. under his authority as a federal field officer, pending full review by the department in Toronto. The third thing he did was write out a warrant for the arrest of Grant Vetch, County Land Registry agent, on charges of federal fraud against the Dominion of Canada. The Northwest Mounted Police Constable, who had ridden with Bolton from Heron Bay, took the warrant into Cold Water Crossing the next morning. Grant Vetch was brought back on the same road he had ridden in fury 4 days before, this time on foot, in handcuffs, on his way to the railway station, and then to Toronto, and then to whatever a federal court would make of him. The families who had sheltered through the blizzard watched from the doorway of the stone office building. Nobody cheered. It was 20 below, and the road was iced, and what they were watching was not a triumph so much as a correction, a wrong thing being set back toward right, which is a quieter satisfaction than a victory. But the silence that followed Grant Vetch down that road was a different kind of silence than the silence of an empty building. And every person standing in that doorway felt the difference. The town of Coldwater Crossing changed its opinion of Elspeth Caird the way towns do, quietly, without apology, as though they had never thought otherwise. She did not hold it against them. She was too busy to hold much of anything against anyone. She was appointed official temporary records custodian for the district, a title that was awkward and modest and meant everything, because she was the only person in 40 miles who could read, catalog, and authenticate Dominion land documents with the thoroughness a federal standard required. Hugh Dunbar had trained her for exactly this work over 14 years, and she understood now that he had known she would need it. The mill was repaired over the winter, Solomon Caird directing, various families contributing days of labor as a form of gratitude that didn't require putting anything into words. When spring came to the lake country, slow, and then all at once, the courtyard that had been choked with fallen timber and frozen debris went green with the first tentative grass. The bone folder sat on her desk, which was a real desk now, solid and level, set before the window of the stone office building that had been her floor and her ceiling and her reason to stay. The lantern light fell across the ivory handle, across the small impressed mark, the crown, the scale, the key, that she had carried for months without knowing what she was carrying. One evening in May, Solomon Caird sat on the stone step outside and watched the last light go orange over the surface of the lake, and Elspeth came out and sat beside him. She had the bone folder in her hands, turning it over in the way she sometimes did in quiet moments. "What did you think you were buying?" Solomon asked. "That day in the square, with your $8. The lake moved at the edge of the world. The smell of new wood and old stone drifted from the open mill door behind them. "I thought I was buying a roof," Elspeth said, "but I think Hugh always knew I was buying the thing he couldn't finish himself." She closed her hand around the bone folder. It fit her palm exactly right, the way it always had. Warm from her pocket, worn smooth from years of the same grip. She had always assumed it fit because she had carried it so long. She understood now that she had it exactly backward. Hugh Dunbar had kept it because it belonged to the work, and the work had always been meant to be hers.